No. Brown v. Board of Education was passed, creating more equal opportunities for education across the United States for people of color. So we're celebrating that anniversary today. Golden Gate University has been around since 1901, so we're into our 123rd year. And our mission is to help you thrive in today's world, because we are in a world of learning, unlearning, and relearning constantly. That's what we go through every single day. You've learned some things that you need to unlearn, and then there's some things you need to relearn. And isn't that the process of life? And so that's what we do here. We work with primarily adult learners who are thinking about a career change, thinking about a career transition, doing something new. And we do a pretty good job at that. We were named the #1 university for adult learners in the United States for 4 years running. And we have a number of programs that are top rated. So meet my colleagues sometime during this morning. We'd love to talk to you about what your career goals and aspirations are and how we might fulfill them. Now, I have something in common with our speaker for this morning, Nick. Nick and I are both graduates of Brown University. Don't hold that against us. But then we both graduated in history. I had a degree in history and American civilization. Then we both somehow ended up on Wall Street. He went to more investment banking, I think, and I went to work for a little small country bank, which is now known as JP Morgan Chase. Then came out here and led Citibank operations for the West Coast. And then I really got involved with entrepreneurs. And so we run an entrepreneurship program here, 12-week program. We're up to 400 graduates. That's free. And we've launched several successful businesses out of that. So those are things that are available. If any of you ever want to think, geez, I want to really get my business started, we welcome you into our cohort and class. We have another one starting in the fall. But again, our mission is to help you thrive and survive in this world, learn what you need to know, and the world is always changing. So welcome to Golden Gate University. Now, what happened on the Dow yesterday? It hit the 40,000 mark. Yes, it did. Year I graduated from school, the Dow was 924. Not that long ago, but it's amazing what the stock market is doing over the course of these years. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Did you enjoy a bagel or a nice cup of coffee this morning? So delicious. We have our friends at Adobe to thank for sponsoring breakfast. Founded 40 years ago on the simple idea of creating innovative products that change the world, Adobe offers groundbreaking technology that empowers everyone everywhere to imagine, create, and bring any digital experience to life. And they brought bagels and coffee to life. So thank you, Adobe. Let's also give a big round of applause to our amazing volunteers who arrived extra early this morning. Volunteers, if you could please raise your hands so people know who you are. Thank you, thank you. Our chapter is 100% volunteer-led, and they helped bring today's event to life, so thank you so much. And let's give a big shout out to our organizing team, Pam, Lorraine, Amy, and Sophie, who are working hard behind the scenes on our chapter. So thank you. We couldn't do this without the support of our community. So if you are interested in volunteering at a future Creative Mornings event, we encourage you to do so. I've put a notepad in the back where you can write down your name and your email, and we'll add you to our day of volunteering list. We typically send that out a week before our events, and you can sign up for a spot to volunteer. And now it is time for our 20-second pitches. So we'd like to ask anybody interested in pitching themselves to our audience in 20 seconds or less to come up to the front here and share. Maybe you are looking for a job, maybe you're hiring, maybe you have a really fun event coming up. Now is your opportunity to let everybody know. We'll have to limit this to about 6 people just for timing. But this is a really great way to make new connections. So I encourage anybody to come up now. Sure.
Well, cool. Hi, I'm Katie Meza. I am Peruvian. So this has to do with that. So is everybody going to be here on May 26th? If you're not, I feel bad for you. Because in the Mission, we have Carnival. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. It's a huge parade. Yes, thank you. It's a huge parade that comes down Mission Street. I'm in an Afro-Peruvian dance group, so I'll be performing. And even this year, our Carnival queen is Peruvian. So it's a big deal, and that's why I'm here, to celebrate that. I'm also a designer, so hello. So if you need any digital design freelance, e-commerce, design, branding, whatever, that too, but mostly like come out May 26th. It's a good day to be Peruvian. So thank you.
How's it going, everyone? This is my first creative morning, so great to meet all of you. And I'm here partially to just meet really great creative people, but I am also looking for full-time work right now. So a bit about me is I have a background in creative strategy. So doing a lot of interesting work with brands like Uber, Google, Facebook, et cetera, understanding audience insights and what consumers react to. But then also on the other side of that, I'm a filmmaker and I understand how to tell a good narrative, translate insights into effective creative, that sort of thing. It's really what drives me all the time. So if you're interested in any of those subjects, if you know of any opportunities, or if you just want to talk about anything, love talking about film especially, come up to me and we'll chat in a bit. Thank you.
Sure, come on up.
I didn't know you did this. I came to Creative Mornings in New York like long time ago. Okay, so I'm looking for another fat job. I got laid off in the summer and it's been an interesting journey, but I moved out here to teach at the Stanford Design School and spent 6 years teaching designing your life, how you build a career and a life with the design and innovation process, and scaled that to like 400 universities around the world. And then I was at Airbnb on the learning and development team, building out manager onboarding and manager development. And it's been a wild journey not being able to find something next. So I've been taking contract work. So if you hear anything, that would be tremendously awesome. And I came here for the New York energy because that's where I'm from. And I just like wanted to hear you talk about it.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Elena. This is my second time being here. I'm super excited to meet all of you. I am from the most creative job or industry, which is finance. I'm a personal financial planner, and I also work with companies, small businesses, and startups to help them grow, to help them raise funds, and to optimize the expenses to make sure that they scale. So if you know anybody or yourself interested in financial planning and management, feel free to approach me. Thank you so much.
And I have a quick 20-second pitch on behalf of Sophie, who works at Swiss Next at Pier 17. They are hiring for a program manager for AI. So you can find the job description on their website and talk to Sophie about it after the talk, but they would love to meet you. Any final last, anyone? Alrighty. Before I introduce Nick, our speaker, I'd like to read through the Creative Mornings Manifesto with you all. It would be really fun if we could all read it out loud together, if you can read the screen. So let's get started with everyone is creative. A creative life requires bravery and action, honesty and hard work, We are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make things you love. We believe in the power of community. We believe in giving a damn. We believe in face-to-face connections, in learning from others, in hugs and high fives. We bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. Everyone is welcome. Thank you. Our theme for this month is vibrant, and it was chosen by our San Antonio chapter and illustrated by Isabel Ann Castro. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Nick Martell. Nick is the co-founder and co-host of the Best One Yet podcast. Originally from New York City, Nick met his co-host and current best friend, Jack Kravici Kramer, as freshman year roommates before graduating from Brown University. They went on to work on Wall Street, and he got his MBA. In 2011, Nick and Jack launched Market Snacks, a business newsletter, alongside his full-time work at Endeavor, where he advised entrepreneurs in emerging markets. In 2019, Nick and Jack sold Market Snacks to Robinhood, where it became Robinhood Snacks. And then in 2022, Nick and Jack spun off their podcast out of Robinhood into a new and independent company and rebranded the pod as The Best One Yet, aka TBOY. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to Nick Martell.
Rachel, Sophie, Robert, Golden Gate University, Creative Mornings, thank you so much for having me. It is exciting to be here, and this is a really cool audience. I got to speak with some people earlier. I'm Nick from The Best One Yet, although, unfortunately, you're going to get half as good a presentation as typical because my other half, Jack Kravici Kramer, my co-host, is not with us. He's on the East Coast. So I'll do my best, and hopefully we can round up. So Jack and I go back a long ways, and I'll sprinkle on some context in a second, but we wanted to share with you how vibrancy is in the DNA of what we build, what we launch, what we do every single day with our show and with our podcast. So today, in the next 20 minutes, we're going to tell you how we create vibrancy, how we live vibrancy, and one secret that we've found to vibrancy. But first, like I said, and like we say on our show, I want to sprinkle on some context. So 16 years before our theme song of our podcast, Jack and I met as freshman year roommates in Vermont. And Jack and I just totally chance hit it off. We happened to have the same set of Seinfeld DVDs. They were complementary, seasons 2 and seasons 3. So we immediately knew we had a point of connection there. And we just continued to have a lot of fun in college and working in finance right after school, living in the East Village of New York, where I'd grown up. And we ended up starting something as a side hustle that started as this, Market Snacks, a daily email newsletter we would write on the subways on our way back from our jobs in finance, secretly hiding it from our bosses so they would not find out, to selling the company and spinning it back out. In fact, Jack and I, in a funny way, have experienced every element in the cycle of entrepreneurship. We've gone from a side hustle where we did literally have this need for creativity when we were working in bank jobs, to then selling it to Robinhood, the tech company out here, which brought us from New York to California, to then after 3 years at Robinhood, spinning out our podcast and our audience into our own company just to get back to entrepreneurship, to do the creative work that we love doing. And what I love about this story with Jack is that that side hustle we started right after college, outside our bank jobs, is essentially the same product that we have today. It's just been rebranded and it's grown in creative and exciting, vibrant ways. And our audience is extremely vibrant. They call themselves the Yetis and the Besties, as in the best one yet. And they voted us to win the Webby Award just a couple weeks ago for Best Business Podcast. So it's a special audience that we would not be anywhere without. And they happen to be this vibrant group. I've got to meet a couple of them, like Dong over here, who already are here today. Now, let's get into vibrancy. How about that? First, how do Jack and I create vibrancy every single day in a podcast? Well, Jack and I think there really are three keys. The first is a philosophy that content is king, but curation is queen. And what I mean is, how many people got a push notification from some news app today? You can raise your hand. Yeah, it's everybody. We live in a world where there is just so much content. It's essentially a commodity. So you can create great content. But the other way to really make content stand out is when you curate it. And that's where we found value, creativity, and vibrancy, is when we can go into the world and say, hey, yeah, there are 20 news stories today in the Wall Street Journal on the front page that cover every bit about the business world, but we want to curate what's interesting for our audience. So our show is 3 interesting, relevant, cool business news stories every day that don't feel like business news because we've curated what's interesting and we make it relevant to you. We're limiting ourselves to 3 stories every day. And by limiting ourselves to 3 stories, we have to curate what's the most powerful. And that's why people turn to us. Anyone can open up a web browser and read about dozens of business news stories. But the real value, we think, is in who's going to tell you the 3 that you really should know. So curation is key for us. It's part of our philosophy. Second key to vibrancy for us is the headline hammer. The headline hammer is something Jack and I do every day. Now, how many people here work on a creative project where it is months and months long, typically weeks, and it takes a while to do? Again, most everyone here. Jack and I have to create a new thing every single day. So in order for us to launch a product, to create a product, and it's a podcast, but frankly, we think of every episode we do as like a song or an album. It's a creative thing we put out into the world, and then we don't touch it after that. But in order to build something creative every single day, we found you gotta have a process. And our process is the headline hammer. In fact, right before Rachel introduced me, I was actually chatting with Jack doing our headline hammer. The headline hammer is when Jack and I wake up every morning, we go through about 30 or 40 business news sources from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, all the way to Women's Wear Daily, the Business of Fashion, a food blog. We're getting information wherever we can get it. We put it into a single Google Doc that we share every day. And then Jack and I go through that doc and say, hey, this is the mix of 3 interesting stories. We call it our perfect mix. Maybe a macro story, maybe a microeconomic story, a story that's in, what do we think? Oh, jobs related. Oh, what about this one? That's startup related. We'll find the perfect mix. But we need that process every single morning in order to be creative. If we didn't have it, things would just go off the rails. So every morning at 5 a.m., I wake up, I go for a run. I then jump into an hour of business news research, and then Jack and I speak every morning on the dot and figure out our perfect mix. Yesterday, for example, we covered a story on Sesame Street's creativity that hacked and grew their social media page. And we also did a story on Uber and how they're partnering with Instacart, surprisingly. Well, we found those stories, we put them in our doc, and we curated them, but we needed that process in order to make that creativity happen. Finally, and I think this one will particularly resonate with this audience, is to have a feeling. And the feeling of our show, a business news show, is brighter. Now, when Jack and I were at Robinhood, the stock trading app, they'd recently IPO'd. We'd been there for 3 years. It was really exciting to be at a tech company going through this crazy moment. Our podcast was editorially independent and ran under the brand Robinhood Snacks. When Jack and I left Robinhood and spun out to become our own independent entrepreneurs again, the first thing that we did, the very first thing, was a brand strategy. The first thing we did was engage with brand strategists and figure out, who are we? Who are we talking to? What are we really? Are we a business news show, or are we something more? And what we discovered from that brand strategy is that we were something. There are so many business news shows out there, but what really differentiated us was the feeling that we gave our audience. We made them feel brighter in every sense of the word. We made them feel brighter because they felt smarter, and we made them feel brighter because they felt happier. Because when you listen to our show, there's 20 minutes every day of the best one yet. It makes you feel like you know something new. You've got that inside scoop on Sesame Street's social media strategy you can take to your job. But you also are feeling happier because you're like, hey, there's this funny story about Uber and Instacart, and Uber's launching a bus service. That's kind of crazy. So the feeling that we're giving our audience at the end of the day with Jack's and my chemistry going all the way back to college is our differentiator. It's a brightness feeling. And we found that to be extremely powerful. In fact, that strategy of being brighter is something Jack and I employ in every single thing we do. So when we're building out a story on how Target is hosting birthday parties as a way to kind of grow the brand and expand in a way that Walmart can't, that is a story we chose because it's brighter. It makes you smarter and it makes you happier. But when Jack and I are deciding to also launch a new product like merch and other apparel, we ask ourselves, is this going to make people feel brighter? And when we're making a business decision about closing a deal, we ask ourselves, is this deal going to make our audience feel brighter in some way? Like everything we do comes back to this feeling, whether or not you even see what that thing is we're talking about. So to whip up the takeaways, as my co-host Jack would say, when it comes to vibrancy and creating vibrancy every day, the three things we think are key are to have a philosophy, to have a process, and to have a feeling. Whether you're a creative who is writing and building and drawing logos during the day, or if you're running a business news show. But Jack and I also think it's not just how you can apply vibrancy to your work, it's also how you can apply vibrancy to your life. So there are actually three things Jack and I have learned as podcasters we think can apply to everyone in this room. And it's funny for us because 10 years ago, we didn't even know you could do podcasting as a full-time job. And frankly, I don't think our parents still totally understand what we do as a full-time job as podcasters. Something radio-ish seems to be the response. So the first part about vibrancy in your life is that there's always a story. You just have to find it. So every day, Jack and I go into all this business news, right? And let's take Abercrombie and Fitch, publicly traded company. They've been doing great on the stock market the last couple of years. Now, if you saw their latest earnings report of Abercrombie, you're going to notice the revenues were up, profits were up. There was kind of I think a tax adjustment that they made. And if you're reading CNBC, you're going to get all of that information. You're going to get the net income, you're going to get the key data, and maybe some customer level stuff. But Jack and I jumped into the earnings call. And we read through the whole call, and we noticed this theme with Abercrombie and Fitch, which was that there was a wedding dress that cost $45 for cocktail parties that was like their best performing product. And if then you looked into their earnings financials and what their top segment was, it was women's dresses. And then when you put it together and saw where the profits were coming from, we redid that entire story. What we realized is the story isn't Abercrombie and Fitch had another good quarter. The story was Abercrombie and Fitch is getting driven by a single $45 cocktail dress. That's the story. And that's where we found a differentiator. That's why people think our podcast is vibrant, is because we're not just telling the news of Abercrombie's quarter. We are telling the story of a wedding dress that is driving an entire company that we all know about. That's storytelling, and you can find that in any job you do. So maybe that storytelling is how you describe yourself when you're doing a job application. Maybe the story you tell where you pull out that one detail, maybe it's when you're making a pitch at your next company meeting for a project you want to work on. Either way, there's always a story there. You just have to find it, and then you can tell it. Second, we've discovered there is a formula for interesting. When you want to create something that's interesting because then it gets shown, shared, cared about. Interesting is key. If you follow this formula, you can find the interesting. So bold plus specific equals interesting. Bold plus specific equals interesting. And what Jack and I mean when we say this is that when you're describing something in a creative role or any other role, you can just describe it, or you can find the very particular intense thing that stands out. So for example, Jack and I just covered yesterday on the show a story about Sesame Street and how Sesame Street actually is a social media strategy that's become one of the top performing in the world of business, which is a fascinating story to us. Now, when Jack and I tell that story, we could just say Sesame Street, Sesame Street, Sesame Street over and over and just tell that story to you. What made it interesting, though, was finding what was bold and what was specific. What was bold was when we picked out the character names. So we talked about how Elmo has jumped into DMs. Elmo is in your DMs, baby. And that is what's driving it. That's a fact. Actually, Sesame Street decided to invest in having their characters respond to direct messages from their audience because they found that drove engagement, which also drove growth because it was like a digital autograph. When you got a message from Elmo, you would then share it, which got more people to follow Elmo, which grew Sesame Street, which has made it even more relevant. So the story was actually not just this headline news of Sesame Street and they're doing well on social media. We got bold and specific. Elmo is slipping into your DMs, and that is driving Sesame Street right now. That's how you can reframe that story that we just said you got to find to make it interesting. Bold plus specific. We actually turned that story into a very interesting takeaway, which was that not everything you do has to scale, especially in San Francisco in the tech industry. Everyone talks about scale, scale, scale. Everything's got to scale. Well, our bold and specific takeaway about Sesame Street's social media strategy was that you don't have to scale. That's bold and it's specific. And that's how you make a story interesting. And then finally, when it comes to making your life vibrant, another thing Jack and I have learned from podcasting is to be 110% of yourself. That doesn't mean being inauthentic. Being 110% of yourself is being a little bit more of yourself. Because when you listen to us in podcasting, you're listening to us. You're not seeing us. You're multitasking. You're driving your car. You're walking your dog. You're doing something with the fridge. So you don't really engage with us in the same way as when you're just staring at a TV. That means Jack and I got to like amp things up a little bit. So when we say 110% of ourselves, it means if you're just chatting, you would say, yeah, I like pizza. You know, I enjoy pizza. I eat pizza. A16, great pizza. It's good, you know. But when you're on a podcast, you love pizza. You really love pizza. It's really good. I love A16. I mean, I go there in the marina and I get that A16 pizza and I'm devouring the stuff. That's being a little bit more than just our typical selves. It's being 110% of ourselves. It's still us. We're just amping it up to get heard a little bit more. And that's something we learned on our first day of podcasting 6 years ago, and it's stuck with us ever since. We have a very intimate medium. We are in your ears. We have a close relationship. We are close with our listeners, and we love that. And one of the ways we're able to be close with them is because Jack and I aren't just talking on a microphone. Podcasting is a craft. We think about every line, every inflection, every detail on our show. Everything you hear in those 20 minutes every day, it is carefully thought out as much as it is also spontaneous. But that also means we are amping it up a little bit so that you don't just hear us, you connect with us. We're being 110% of ourselves. It's still us, just a little bit more of us. Jack and I think this can apply to your life and your work too, because it's so easy to forget that in a world where there's so much noise, so many people, so much confusion, so much busyness, you can stand out simply by taking a little bit more push to be 110% of yourself. Maybe it's in that meeting, you lean in a little further and you do share that thing you're not comfortable or not certain you should share, because you could be 110% of yourself. You want to be not just present, you want to be really present when you're present. And being 110% of yourself, you have to do it to have a podcast, but you also can do it in the world of not podcasting. So to whip up the takeaway, when it comes to vibrancy in your life, there's always a story. You just have to find it. Bold plus specific is the formula for interesting, and be 110% of yourself. But there is one final secret to vibrancy that I did not want to leave out that Jack and I were chatting about, and actually he didn't know about this. I whipped this up last minute on him. It's Jack. It's my co-host. It's co-foundership is friendship and beyond. You know, I would not and could not do this incredible job that we love of creating pop biz business news every single day if I didn't have my co-host, Jack, who happens to also be my best friend, 15-year buddy, and a first college roommate. I know not everyone can have a co-founder, and there are plenty of successful businesses where you don't have a co-founder. You have yourself as a founder, and that is an incredible journey to go on. I found that co-foundership is the reason our company exists today, why I get to do something I didn't know existed 10 years ago and absolutely love, and get to take a concept of business news that's not creative and make it creative. It's because of the relationship Jack and I have. So Jack and I talk about not just being co-founders, but a co-foundership. It's a deep, deep relationship. In fact, there's data to back this up. We may as well mention Sam Altman and OpenAI because they're consistently in the news, but they've done the research on this when he was at Y Combinator, that startups with co-founders tend to be more successful. This is the most important decision you make as the founder of a company. And interestingly, there are nuances to this. Like meeting your co-founder in school is a more likely successful outcome than if you just meet your co-founder because someone connected you. There's a level of trust that comes with being a co-founder. It's a friendship first and foremost. And co-foundership is the secret to vibrancy, because we cannot have so much fun on our podcast. We cannot be as vibrant unless we trusted each other. And that all comes to our co-foundership with Jack. In fact, this summer we went full-time on our company and raised money and then ultimately ended up selling it. We were taking all these city bike rides throughout New York City every day, feeding off the energy of New York together, going to all these workout classes, just living and breathing together and growing the company, building it. And it was because of this friendship. That is not something we could have done alone. Of course, you can build a company alone. That is totally fine. But I found that when it comes to vibrancy, Jack is my vibrancy. And we've been through a heck of a lot together as a result. So thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone can find a little vibrancy in their day, because vibrancy really is something that's special. It can be an energy, it can be a feeling, it can be storytelling, it can be a $45 wedding dress at Abercrombie & Fitch. That's vibrancy. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Nick. We now have time for a Q&A. So we have a couple of mics that Sophie's going to bring around. But if you have a question and want to raise your hand, same for the people on Zoom.
Thanks so much for a great talk.
Thanks.
I think it's so interesting, like that you and Jack have this like longstanding friendship and the, co-foundership. And I'm curious, like, I imagine there must be times when like you get on each other's nerves or like, get upset with each other about whether it's like something in your personal relationship or on the business side. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you kind of deal with that conflict, and how do you like stop it from like, going from, if it's a personal thing, how do you stop it from like influencing how you do your podcast that day or that type of thing? So.
Well, kind of three answers to that. And your name is Melissa. Thanks, Melissa. The first is when Jack and I get in the studio, that's a sacred space. And when we're recording, it's a creative, sacred space. And the Beatles like often talked about when they were in the studio, it was like cut off from everyone. It was just them doing their thing, jamming, making music. And Jack and I like to think about creating our podcast like we're creating music. So when we're in that studio, it's a sacred space where we can just be ourselves and it's just us. So one thing is, when it comes to the show, whenever we're in that space, it's just always fun and love and having a great time. When it comes to tensions with another human being, that can inevitably rise up, where Jack and I found are two things are really helpful. One, just radical transparency. Like I told him this week, I know I'm going to be cranky a bit because our little baby was sick all week and I got no sleep. And like, I don't know if that's going to affect me or not, but I just told him it. And it was just totally transparent. Jack and I were talking about our live shows that we've been doing, like what our tour is going to look like. And so Jack was sharing with me just something he was feeling around whether we could fit it in, and some stress he was having about a certain date and a certain location. Can we squeeze in 5 shows in 2 quarters and travel to these cities and do a live tour? And he didn't have a specific plan with that. He just shared with me this feeling he had. So the other element is just being really transparent about how you're feeling, and that avoids a lot of conflict, because then I can like read off that and be, okay, Jack's stressed about this. I'm not going to force something on him. And then the final one is something Jack and I have been doing for years, which we call our one and done rule. So one and done. In the creative process, it can be really personal when someone edits your work. We all know that, right? Like you write something, you draw something, then someone comes in and edits it with no context. You're like, wait, that's not what I intended. And it's frustrating, and that can lead to tension. So Jack and I instituted years ago something called one and done. When I write or create or prep a story and Jack edits it, I don't question Jack about editing it. I just trust that he made the right changes. When I drop a joke about Costco's hot dog deal and he thinks it's not funny, so he cuts it, I'm not pushing back on it, because why create that tension? Being right about that one thing, maybe about the Costco joke, isn't worth harming the relationship and slowing down the company. So the one and done rule helps us with content creation and avoiding tension. Being radically transparent helps us avoid tension. And frankly, having a sacred space where we just know we can do our thing, that helps us too. Yes.
This was so inspirational. Thank you so much. I wonder how you guys go about creativity fatigue. Do you ever hit the wall, or one of you or both at the same time, where there is a high volume of productions that you guys do with research, creativity, all of that stuff? I wonder how you go about where you're like, I don't know what to talk about, or I don't know how to overcome it.
So we have not faced a creativity fatigue. And I think this is why we constantly surround ourselves with inspiration and we find a way to connect it. Now, one reason we haven't faced it, maybe, although there are times when you feel more creative and less creative, is we have to do a daily show. So part of it is we have a deadline every day. We got to do the show. The other side of it is I have a co-host and a co-founder. So like usually if one of us is a little off, the other one can help the other person and create a sense of like bursty creativity. But exposure, I think, is really key, because we cover business news, which is not creative. So how do we make it creative? Well, we call our category pop biz, pop culture business news. We make business news feel like pop culture. And the way we do that is just constant inspiration. Like my wife and I went to an art show over the weekend. When I'm looking at the art, when I'm looking at this painting, I am trying to think of how I can relate that to Goldman Sachs's earnings. And I have a notes app in my phone that Jack and I share where we're dropping creative things in there that maybe have no clear connection at the moment, but it creates like a bullpen of creative thoughts. So when we're like uncertain how to connect something, we'll go to that notes app and say, hey, oh yeah, Jack was at an art show a couple weeks ago. He had this funny line about Picasso, and then it's like, okay, well maybe Goldman's earnings kind of remind us of that Picasso painting, and we're able to kind of like build up this repertoire from all the inspiration that we can go to and be like, oh yeah, maybe this thing from a year ago is relevant. Sometimes Jack and I will prep a takeaway and just leave it. And for 6 months, it'll just sit there. And we had one the other day about philosophy, and it was a quote from Aristotle. We didn't have the right business news story that connected to that quote. We just had it in our notes app. And then 6 months later, we were like, oh my God, we've got this story right now that we could be doing on, I forgot which retailer it was. Oh, it might have been a tech company, but we're like, oh my God, this connects with Aristotle's quote. We're like, oh my God, Uber's earnings report and this Aristotle quote from 6 months ago that we read about in a book, there's a connection there. So sometimes, to answer your question about when we're low on creativity or hitting a roadblock, we've created a kind of treasure trove bullpen of old ideas. We'll go and we'll try to make that connection there.
Thanks. That was a great talk. Thank you. My name is Zaya, and I had a podcast. I'm on a little bit of a pause, and I have 2 questions.
Yes.
One is I took podcast classes and all these things on how to grow the show. And
Yeah.
it kept coming back to, you need to be really specific about your audience, know exactly who they are, not necessarily demographics, but what they're looking for so that you can market effectively. And then it got in my head and a lot of the fun went away. So I'm curious about if you have that for your show and what you think about that. And then the other, which is related, you've been doing it for so long before podcasting was even popular, so you've grown it. For somebody that's new and there's so many podcasts, any thoughts on how to grow your audience?
Yes, growth hacks for growth. Podcasting is an amazing medium for engagement. Once you have a listener, they are committed to you for a long period of time because you are friends with them. You know them. They know you. You know who they are because you know who your audience is. They know you because they hear you every day. So engagement is great. Growth is hard. And growth can come from a few different levers that you can pull. So the first lever, I would say, is CTAs, like being very specific. Like when it comes to podcasting, telling your audience to do certain things, because they're engaged, they will do them. So when you ask your audience to share the show in a very meaningful way, they will share the show. And word of mouth growth is the best way to grow a pod, especially off the bat. The second kind of growth hack to podcast growth is around guesting and appearing on other shows. There's great data that Jack and I focus on, which is that it's hard to get someone who doesn't listen to podcasts to listen to your show, because they have to develop podcasting as a habit and then like your show. It's a big ask. There's a lot of friction. But people who already listen to podcasts are far more likely to try out and listen to your show. So the best way to grow after word of mouth requests is to appear on other podcasts and kind of make this big effort where you host people on your show and they go on and you go on their show. It's tough, but it's actually the other best way to target and reach your audience. The next thing I would say is that what you just described is like the stress of trying to focus so much on who your audience is. That is definitely distracting. And like when you start overthinking content, that's when you run into roadblocks of creating not as good content. So when something gets in your head, like, oh, am I thinking about my audience the right way? Am I speaking to them? Am I using the keywords that they're going to relate to? Then you start changing the content. And at the end of the day, the content's the most important thing. So like one thing Jack and I do is we separate our growth strategy from our content strategy. We create the content every day that makes us happy because we know our audience is going to be happy with it. So we just focus on creating the content. We try not to over strategize. Oh, let's add in this detail because our audience will resonate with it. We then look at growth from another perspective. Okay, now that we've created this product, now that this episode is out there in the world, how do we grow it? Another kind of fun thing we've done on our show is we added a section at the end that had nothing to do with business news. It was shout outs. So we told our audience, we actually were inspired by Peloton for this. If you've done a Peloton ride, you know that they shout out if you've gotten like 10 rides or 50 rides in a Peloton class. We're like, okay, that's actually a really interesting engagement tool. We're going to steal like an artist and use that. So we have our audience submit birthdays, bar mitzvahs, job promotions. One guy just ran a half marathon, and we get probably 20 of these a day that we put into our show. That's become a bit of a growth hack too, of also engaging our audience without changing the content. At the end of the show, we have our list of shout outs we do. Our audience loves it. Then they share that episode with their friends, and that helps grow the show. So it's kind of a win-win. We don't have to change our content because our business news pod is done. And at the very end, we do shout outs. But then our audience loves to then have an incentive to share the episode. So that's kind of another growth hack we've added to our podcast repertoire.
We have time for about one more question, and then we have a couple Zoom questions as well.
Hey, thanks for the talk today.
Thanks.
So listening to what you were saying about your brand and your general strategy of always wanting to be like having a goal of leaving audiences feeling brighter, has there ever been a moment or maybe a few moments where you've had to make some really tough decisions to stick to the brand, whether it was saying no to something that seemed tempting or just having, deciding between two options? What did that look like to you?
Yes, I would say there are two examples of that. One is on the content side and one is on the business side. On the content side, Jack and I are in the news industry, right? Not all news is bright news. That's tough. Like there are times when this country and our news cycle is going through something hard. And Jack and I, as much as our show is fun, bright, and entertaining, have to be thinking, wow, how do we handle this specific news? That is challenging. And it's case by case, to be honest. There's no rule for that. There's just what do we think is going to work for that specific situation? And the one rule I guess we've thought of to handle sensitive news topics is to just be very honest and open and ourselves and say how we're feeling. NBC News, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, they can't do that. They have the burden of telling the objective news. But as podcasters with an audience who has a deep connection with us, when there's a sensitive news story, we found that we have this advantage that we can err on just sharing how we feel. And that is the best way to go. It's not perfect. People still get upset, or they sometimes just wish you'd covered something differently or handled it differently. But with sensitive news stuff that isn't bright, we found that we just err on the side of sharing, hey, here's how we're feeling today. You may feel the same way too. So being authentic really matters in a digital economy. On the business side, when it comes to like what we're doing, basically it always comes down to, will this be something that makes people brighter? A good example of this would be, I'm trying to think, I want to give you a good, when we said no to something. We get a lot of opportunities right now. And Jack and I have to say no and figure out what sticks with the brand. One of them that's come up has been, will we do like use AI in a particular way? And you know, I think we've had a lot of companies pitch us in involving AI in different ways, like in the content production process. And the idea is always efficiency, how to do something faster. And look, Jack and I love efficiency. Like we're always trying to find efficient ways of doing things. But with the AI right now that we've tried to use it, we found that it does not lead to a brighter product. I'm not saying we're not bullish on AI. We think it will be helpful in a lot of ways. And we're constantly, as fans of innovation, trying to find ways to use it. But we've had to say no to a few opportunities because we found, whether it was how AI could take our podcast and turn it into tweets, the result just wasn't a bright content. When it comes to like using AI to curate news stories and find them, it wasn't finding stuff that resonated in a way that was bright. So while that was a business decision where we could have created a faster product, which is also our goal, it was not something that was bright. And so we've said no to those opportunities.
And then there might be some on Zoom.
So thank you, Nick, for this inspirational talk. We have a couple of questions from Zoom. There are 4 questions and we can do 2 at a time. The first question, so you've been doing a 20-minute podcast with three business news at a time. And if you ever if you ever do a long form of podcast for one topic, what kind of topic would you cover? And the second one is, will you ever do an in-person talk show?
The first one I can say, yes. The number one request we get when we do surveys of fans is, can you do more and longer content? So we started doing some interviews, even though we're not an interview pod, because we think that's a fun way to do it. But what I can say is that I can't say something. I can say we are going to launch a second thing. Can't say what it is quite yet. I think that person will be happy. The second question was around a news talk show. Well, this is a fun topic for Jack and me because we have so much fun chatting with each other. We like the idea of also maybe bringing more people into the discussion. So we just recently launched another kind of monthly version of our show we call TBOY Hotline, the best one yet hotline, where you can call in with a question, whether it's related to your job, your life, your relationships, investing, finance, business news stories, your MBA, you name it. Jack and I love the idea of that show because it's more casual. We record it once a month. It's us on a couch. You call in, we get your voicemail, we answer your questions, and it's 40 minutes of us just chatting with our audience of besties and yetis about their questions. So we've done one of them. Our second episode of that comes out next week on Friday. So 1 week from today. So you should definitely check that out. It's called TBOY Hotline. But we're very bullish on that concept, and we're excited to do more of these TBOY Hotline talk show style shows once a month.
Thank you. So the other 2 questions, with all your knowledge and your news stories or anything about that, have you ever thought of publishing a book? That's the first question. And the last question is, how will you handle politics in the fall? Thank you.
Wow, 2 very different questions. On the book, yes, you know, Jack and I have a product that every day is news. And we often think about how in a week or 2, the episode we just did won't have as much value. So that's why we try to ingrain an evergreen takeaway into every news story we do. How does this news story relate? How does this story about Costco and their new membership adjustment, you know, relate to our takeaway? Well, our takeaway is retail's not dead, bad retail's dead. That's an evergreen concept we've added to a ephemeral news story. So we see the value in a book of curating everything we've curated over 6 years and 1,000 episodes of this show. We've covered nearly 4,000 stories. How do we take that and make it into an evergreen product? Well, it is a book, and Jack and I absolutely have a vision for what that book is. We actually have 3 ideas for what that book could be, but we also know, as 2 guys running this business together, there's a roadmap and a time and a place for every product. And if you try to do too much too soon, you end up doing too little at all. So as much as we're excited to write a book and we literally have the idea on paper, it has to fit into the right timing with our roadmap. So not a short-term thing, more medium, long-term. And then how do you handle politics in the fall? As a brighter show that's on business news, that is going to be a tough question. And I kind of am going to lean on the answer I said before, which is when it comes to sensitive topics, Jack and I want to treat them with respect and on a case-by-case basis. I want to share how we feel. When it comes to politics, we also think that we're a show that isn't about politics. Actually, you can get political news everywhere. Pretty much everything is political news these days. But one fun thing Jack and I found is that we resonate with our audience because we tend to avoid that topic. We talk about policy. We just did a story on the tariffs on Chinese cars and what that means for our car industry. We're about to do a story on Nick Saban, the college football coach, and how he's connected to a Volkswagen factory that's trying to unionize and how that involves the government. So politics does play a role in our stories, but actually one thing we do pride ourselves on, and our advertisers love too, is that we don't get into politics. That as a business news show, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of an election. And as a show that's about brightness, we don't have to rile you up with stuff that, frankly, you can get elsewhere if you want to be riled up. So when it comes to political news, we're not going to ignore it. When there are updates, we're going to give the updates that are important. But you're not going to see episodes of ours that are just purely about the latest thing one of the presidential candidates said. And frankly, I think that is what separates us from so many podcasts where it's so easy to talk about business news and frustrating issues, political news and frustrating issues. And we can kind of be this haven for you to learn and do so in a fun and enjoyable way without having to deal with the politics you get elsewhere.
Thank you so much. Let's give a applause. Thank you. Thank you. Last final announcements. We will see you next month. You can mark your calendar for June 21st. And if you want to stay up to date on all Creative Mornings things, please sign up for our newsletter on the Creative Mornings website and follow us on Instagram. We also have a very exciting first field trip, which will be during Design Week at the Archery. It's kind of a collaborative happy hour on June 7th from 3 to 5 p.m. More information coming soon, but we really would love to see you there. And you're all invited. So thank you and have a great rest of your Friday.